Okay, so for this video, this is going to be my third design video in this series, and this video is going to discuss the actual Anterior Deprogrammer, which in some regards is the simplest, and in some regards is, well, I think it's the simplest design. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. Let's click on the Not for Clinical, turn on the auto background, maxillary, Anterior Deprogrammer. Okay. So I'm going to import STL models, and I'm going to go to this folder here. I'm going to hold the Shift button to select both of them, not Control like most softwares. Click Import, and here we go. Technically, you don't even have to have an opposing model. We could have completely ignored it. There are some advantages to it, so that's why I'm gonna keep bringing it in here, so I can show you some of those advantages. But if you don't have it and all you have is the model you're making the splint on, you can still work. Okay, and well, I'll get to that in just a second, because if you were gonna make a lower Anterior Deprogrammer only, you're going to need the upper. I do think that, actually. But if you're making an upper only appliance, Anterior Deprogrammer in particular, you could skip it. Okay, so set the splint model. I'm going to turn on this Use Print Raft button. It wasn't visible until I set the splint model. And now I'm going to set the opposing and set landmarks. This is why I mentioned I think you do need to have the upper, because if you didn't have the upper, I haven't tried it, honestly. Because this whole workflow is based on the upper model. So, all right, I'm going to click on the mesial lingual cusp of the right molar, and now the left molar, and then the incisal edge sort of anywhere, and then the midline, and I usually aim for the incisive papilla. Click Finish. We've got this little articulator that pops up. I'm going to turn this off over on the right side just because I don't need that. And now we can come over here and begin to survey our model and determine our path of draw. I think I forgot to mention in the Michigan Splint video, if you needed to open the bite, you can do that using the change pin setting, but hopefully you have captured your bite in the correct position, in the position you want to design the appliance. That's just a huge, huge thing. I think it's important. I'm going to click on Survey Model, and now this is my path of draw. Now this is a little different than the other videos, because in the past I was doing full arch. So if I capture view here, it affects, there's undercuts here, but there's also undercuts in the second molar. If I'm doing an Anterior Deprogrammer, and if I'm only going to capture the canines, I don't really care about those, about the second molars. So I'm going to try to idealize it on the canines and the centrals. I'm really looking at just these 6 teeth. Now click Capture View and look around. Like, okay, there's a little shadow there, but there's also a little shadow there. And so maybe that's just the best of both worlds. There's a little bit here, but again, that's not a big deal. If you need to, you can tweak it to the anterior, to the posterior, and you're basically adjusting this little arrow to the anterior, the posterior, left or right. But I'm pretty happy where it is. You can always reposition it and click Capture again, but these are just small little nudges. Okay, I'm going to click Commit button because I'm done. And now it is time to save. Like, once again, it will always make you save. And I'm going to call this Anterior Deprogrammer. And now I get to make the refractory model. So as before, I like to make it pretty tight. So instead of having an offset of 0.12, I'm going to lower that down to 0.06 millimeters. So nice and snug. And my undercut, I'm going to up that to 0.8. Now, one thing to consider is that if you're making a segmental appliance like this, it's just this anterior segment, you might consider making it even tighter just because you have less surface area to grip onto. Just a thought. I don't usually need to, but honestly, that's something to keep in mind. Why might you change those numbers? Well, this would be a scenario where I would consider it. Click OK, and now it's going to generate this green model for us. The green model is the model that the actual appliance is going to be made on. It's factoring in the undercuts we've allowed for and factoring in the path of draw. So here it is. Okay, so now we need to mark our splint margin. And this will be similar. It won't be quite the same as the other two, because this time I want as much grip as I can get. So I'm going to come all the way up here. And then technically, if you find that you don't need it this big, you can always go back with a hand piece, trim back. You see this red line and this orange? That's because it's having problems, and it automatically resolved that. It knew that didn't make sense. But sometimes it can't, and that's where you'll have to go ahead and add some dots yourself. Anyway, I wanted to comment on that because in the previous videos I wasn't getting any of that, and I was trying to describe it, but another little red one. Let's watch it disappear. Then it changed over there, and now it's good. It keeps adding little dots, little nodes to try to resolve it on its own. You can always go back and like, oh, I didn't need that node. Let's just delete that. Right click on it. Oh, I don't need this node, so let's right click on it. Oh, I want one. Let's click one there. Unfortunately, now this one is bright green, which means any node I try to draw, it wants to connect to that. So I want to come back to this last one, just click on it, and now it knows to connect any subsequent dot to it. The software's gotten pretty good at being smart about fixing those little imperfections. When I get to the end, it does have the option to connect endpoints, but usually I don't remember ever using that button. I just hover over it until it gets that big green and click, and it's done. It's closed. Take a quick, look around. Okay, this comes up here a little bit, so maybe I'm going to click there to bring that in. Let this orange one try to resolve on its own. If it doesn't, and it hasn't yet, I'm going to go ahead and click. Zoom in here. Click there. There. It just needed to be on one of those teeth. Remember, it's going to get inflated off of there, so it's still going to contact that. Let's click next. Use the little eyedropper, and it's separate, meaning this color is separate from the rest of it, which means it cut it well, which means the line was continuous, didn't get lost. And then click next, and then we're going to click next one more time. So now the software is creating the shell, the initial shell of the appliance, and then creating a minimum thickness as well. That way, if we try to adjust the shape of it, we know that we can't make it too thin in certain areas. Now I'm going to click on the incisal edge right here. Right here. This is kind of like when we added a raft in the previous videos, but this is where we need to add the deprogrammer. Wherever you want to put it, mark your point. So, Anterior Deprogrammer, and here's the default values. I usually just go ahead and click OK so I can see it and then adjust from there. Now, here's your settings down here. There are the dimensions of it, and you can go through and tweak them as needed. Noticing that the posterior, the lingual aspect, sticks out way lingual to these lower teeth. I do not need the posterior length this far. So right now the posterior length is 10 millimeters. I'm going to cut this down to 7. Hit tab over, and I can kind of see. You can't move it when it's still editing these, so just left click somewhere in here and then you can move around. And that looks like plenty, maybe even more than I need still, but I think I'm okay with that. And I want to make sure it sticks out a little ways. Anytime I shorten the posterior, I tend to increase the anterior. I don't want my patients to be able to protrude past this element. So anterior length, I'm just going to up this to, we'll just say 9.5. Oh, that was anterior width, not length. That was 8. I thought that sounded long for a default. So it's right now it's 5. Let's just up it to 7, and so now it sticks out a little more. Technically, that's the only 2 measurements I have to change. I do usually like to make the whole thing a little bit taller, so it's not, if I turn on the splint shell, so it's not such an abrupt transition. So support height, I'm going to change this to 6, and you can see how it kind of comes up there. And it's a little more gradual that way. Personal preference, not important though. All right, so now I'm pretty much done with that. That's all I really needed to do. So I can come down here. Where was I? I was at the Anterior Deprogrammer. I need to fuse it. If I say, oh yeah, I want to change something again, I can click on Edit, and those little numbers pop up again. If I click Fuse, now the 2 become 1, just like with the wax rim and the other 2. Okay. Now, one thing to notice in this case is that the canine to canine distance is fairly similar to here, which means that when you try this in, you might have to adjust these, or you can go ahead and Control Z to undo, now you can take this blue arrow and drag this down a little ways if you want. I mean, it's going to keep them open pretty far, but at least now you know they're not going to hit their canines. So that's, different options. This is probably the easiest option. And now I can go ahead and refuse that. Okay. One thing that is a little bit peculiar on this is that even though I checked that box up top to use print raft, it's not visible. I've designed my entire splint. The only thing I haven't done is subtracted the inside, which we know is that's that button that is finalized splint. But before I hit that, I want to add my raft. So a little bit of a glitch here in the system so far is that we need to change it from a deprogrammer to flat plane or a Michigan, one of these two. You're not going to change anything with the design. It's not going to affect anything. But now the add print raft is visible again. So I can click right here on the end of this excluding element. It doesn't have to be picky, but I'm just being picky. And then click add raft. So there's my raft. Join the raft, turns blue, and that's it. And now I did forget to smooth this out, so let's go ahead and hit Control Z, Control Z, Control Z. Now it's back to the deprogrammer thing. I can go ahead and click block out large concavities because this inside. It's all smoothed out now. And now I'll go back up and do what I just did a moment ago. Change it to flat plane. It's already, where I clicked is still preserved. Let's go ahead and say add print raft. Join print raft. And finalize splint. Now it's going to cut out the inside where it was all bubbled inside, and now it fits the teeth. And this is how I will print. Okay, so last thing I always like to do is generate the print report, because that means it has the offset, it has the undercut. So if I ever need to make it tighter or looser, I know those values. If I've changed the articulator values, they're all saved as well. And then when I export the splint STL, it'll spit out the text file. And so here we have our deprogrammer and our deprogrammer text file as well. Okay, right here. So if I want to come back into Rayware, this is my Michigan splint, and now I want to print my Anterior deprogrammer. I can drag and drop it right into the software. Here it is. I'm going to click on it, and then I'm going to find this little button that says base. Click on that. And then I'm just going to bring the arrow until it's flat against this base, this platform, this raft that we added. Move it to wherever I want. Here's two of them ready to go. I have it already set up as the Sprint Ray Pro 95, Keystone, Keystone Splint Soft, Key Splint Soft, and we're ready to print. It's not giving me an error on this one. I'm kind of surprised, honestly, but ignore the errors. If it gives you an error like this one, then just ignore it, because it should print just fine. It's a smaller one, so maybe it does feel confident it will print, but either way, they print well for me. There you go. That's the end of this video. Hope these videos have helped you guys. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and then be sure to check out my website, barengarderdds.com, for my other videos. Got a few hundred of them out there on various softwares and designing, mostly on dental, and then a few other things as well. All right, thanks guys. Bye for now.